final decades of the 2nd century BC and the first decades of the 1st century BC were an incredibly tumultuous time in Roman history. Besides wars against Rome's allies on the Italian peninsula, Rome waged war against its king Jugurtha of Numidia and King Mithridates VI of Pontus. A lengthy period of instability culminated in the two civil wars, which broke out after the rogue ex-consul Gaius Marius usurped power while the standing consul was commanding a military expedition. The standing consul was Lucius Cornelius Sulla. He revived Rome's office of dictator, which had been inactive for over a century. Yet, although oftentimes dictators enjoy their position for life, Sulla voluntarily stepped down after he passed his reforms. During the last half of the 2nd century BC, several socio-economic problems rose to the surface of the Roman Republic. Among them was the ever-increasing social and legal divide between Roman citizens and the non-Romans living within their sphere of influence, often long-term allies. The so-called optimates, an aristocratic political faction, were opposed to granting citizenship rights to these peoples, even to those living on the peninsula. Already in 133 BC, tribune Tiberius Gracchus, part of the Reformis Popularis, attempted to issue reforms regarding both the disgruntled non-Romans within the Republic and the decrease of smallholding farmers who were the backbone of the army. For his reform proposals, Tiberius had to pay with his life as he was murdered upon encouragement by Roman senators. 10 years later, his younger Popularis brother Gaius Gracchus, who walked a similar political path, was executed together with a number of his followers. Nearly 4 decades later, there still wasn't much progress regarding agrarian reforms and the citizenship issue. Sure, the Popularis consul Gaius Marius instituted army reforms, broadening the recruitment scope to Romans without property and promising land after serving. Still, no solution was in sight for non-Romans. Meanwhile, Rome kept expanding. King Attalus III of Pergamon bequeathed his kingdom to the Roman Republic. After crushing a brief rebellion orchestrated by the pretender Eumenes III, it became the Roman Provincia Asia. In 121 BC, a Roman army came to the Greek colony Massila's aid to fend off neighboring Gallic tribes. This resulted in the new Provincia Gallia Narbonensis. 3 years later, the Numidian king Micipsa passed away, and his adopted son Jugurtha usurped his throne. Numidia was a traditionally loyal ally to the Romans, and they couldn't let a rogue king destabilize this. After years of war in 106 BC, Jugurtha's father-in-law Bocchus I betrayed him, handing him over to Rome. During this time, the non-noble reformist Gaius Marius was elected as consul, rising to an unprecedented series of 5 consulships in a row. We've already briefly glossed over his reforms, lowering the bar for legionnaire volunteers and promising land as a reward for serving in the army. Thanks to the promise of land after serving, soldiers began considering their commander as their patron, rather than the republic itself. This new professionalized army of lower social classes proved its worth when the Germanic Cimbri trekked southward from Jutland. Supported by a mixture of Germanic Celtic tribes such as the Teutons, they entered Gaul and northern Italy. Marius and the new army didn't just defeat the tribes in 2 subsequent bloody battles, but nearly exterminated them. The fact his soldiers developed more personal loyalty to their commander would have a considerable effect in the decades to come, many effects that Marius himself had not foreseen. But the Roman citizenship question wasn't resolved and wouldn't be for years. Although Marius had modest progressive thoughts regarding the scope of army recruits, he wasn't a dead-set populist reformer. During his consulship in 100 BC, the clever tribune Lucius Appuleius Saturninus proposed far-reaching reforms. During the subsequent riots in Rome, Saturninus was killed and Marius sided with the optimates, at least for the time being. Even so, what followed was far from a period of tranquility. Another 9 years later, legislation to grant citizenship to non-Romans living on the peninsula failed to pass. To give you an idea of the atmosphere it failed to pass in, the tribune proposing the law was murdered. This statement by the senatorial class not to grant tribes living on the peninsula citizenship appeared to have been the straw that broke the camel's back. Former allies such as the Etruscans, Umbrians, and Samnites united and took up arms against the Republic. What followed were the so-called social wars, an incredibly bloody and violent conflict. conflict lasting for a bit over 2 years. It was akin to a civil war. After all, the tribes living on the peninsula had been influenced by Roman military culture for centuries. After a few years of bloodshed, the Senate eventually backed down and granted citizenship to those tribes giving up the fight. Only the Samnites continued their war and were mercilessly fought, mainly by Commander Cornelius Sulla. Sulla had distinguished himself 2 decades earlier during the Jugurthine War. When Bocchus I betrayed King Jugurtha, it was Sulla who led the dethroned king to Rome and paraded him through the streets before throwing him in the Mamertine prison, where he passed away not too long after. A convinced Optimatus supporter, Sulla became well known as an able military commander and would play a lead role in the near future. But even before the Social War ended, another enormous war broke out in the east. The kingdom of Pontus, ruled by Mithridates VI, had risen from the ashes of the Seleucid Empire in Asia Minor. Reigning since 124 BC, Mithridates expanded Pontus around the Black Sea. When Roman officials continued levying taxes on Asia Minor, the king used Pontus's considerable armament, the local population's resentment of Rome, and Rome's instability. He swiftly expelled Roman officials and conquered the entirety of Asia Minor without too much opposition. Latin speakers who remained were executed during the conquest, with some sources indicating over 80,000 massacred. Clearly, Rome could not let this happen unpunished. There so happened to be a consular election that year, with the Optimatus-dominated Senate voting Sulla to become a consul. An army was raised and Sulla received command. With the prospect of riches and glory retaking Pontus, Marius and his political allies weren't happy Sulla received command. When Sulla left Rome on his way to Pontus, they took action. The popularis tribune Publius Sulpius Rufus used the threat of riots and anarchy to pacify the Senate. He then took the vote to the tribunus plebis. These removed Sulla as commander and granted the role to Marius, who was now in his 60s. Sulla received word of this when he was around Nola, and would not let himself be cast aside that easily. Contrary to the Marian faction's expectations, as it went against the ancient tradition and Roman law, Sulla's army remained loyal to him instead of the Republic, and they began a slow march on Rome. Now, Sulla claimed to be championing the senatorial order. Yet ironically, although his army remained loyal, all but one of his officers defected during his march on Rome. Only Quaestor Licinius Lucullus remained loyal. At the core of this change of loyalty stood the new composition of the Roman army. A considerable number of Sulla's soldiers were former non-Romans who took up arms against Rome during the Social War. Romans considered serving the Republic a great honor and wouldn't think of taking up arms against the Eternal City. Dr. Philip Matisak notes how this is the first time in Roman history that the Republic faced an army more loyal to its commander than Rome itself, setting a precedent for the decades, if not centuries, to come. Panicked and in a corner, Marius promised freedom to every slave and gladiator who took up arms to fight on his side. Yet in the ensuing battle, Sulla emerged victorious. Rome was captured, Sulpicius was killed, and Marius narrowly escaped and went into exile in Carthage. Sulla reinstated the Senate and left for Greece to reconquer territories lost to King Mithridates. As Athens had turned its back to Rome and joined Mithridates, Sulla earned the dubious honor of being the only man in history to have attacked both Athens and Rome. Sulla's supporting consul Gnaeus Octavius remained behind in Rome to see to day-to-day business. He was joined by the Marian-supported consul Lucius Cornelius Sulla, tolerated by Sulla to show his good faith. Approximately 1 year after Sulla left, his enemies rapidly regained control in Rome. Marius returned from his exile, was re-elected as consul, and together with his political allies, he purged Rome of most of Sulla's loyalists. Octavianus too was killed in the chaos. The now popularis-dominated Senate declared a separate war against Mithridates and outlawed Sulla. Yet, just 17 days after retaking control, Marius passed away. Cinna succeeded him. While all this was going on, Sulla emerged victorious in reconquering territory from Mithridates. After retaking Greece, he entered Asia Minor in 85 BC, where he defeated Mithridates and exiled him towards the east. Once he re-established control, he returned in 83 BC with his veteran army to recapture Rome. The populares had ample time and opportunity to prepare themselves for Sulla's return, but still they weren't up to the task of stopping him. Cinna prepared to meet him on foreign soil, but was murdered by his own soldiers in a most likely apolitical mutiny. Sulla was able to trek all the way to Rome, and several Roman nobles even raised their own armies and joined his side. Among these nobles was the young volunteer general, Gnaeus Pompeius Strabo. The bond of trust between these men was strong enough for Pompeius' son to marry Sulla's daughter. Although the war lasted for a short while, it was incredibly violent. In 82 BC, Sulla forced a decisive battle at the Colline Gate just outside of Rome. He defeated the Popularis forces. Meanwhile, Pompeius reconquered the North African territories from the Marian faction. The last bastion was the Iberian Peninsula, where Marian general Quintus Sertorius resided. He managed to hold off Sulla's forces for a considerable time, using the native tribes to wage guerrilla warfare of sorts. It wasn't until Sertorius was assassinated in 73 BC that this final thorn in the side of the Optimate Senate was removed, although by then Sulla wasn't there to see the results. As Sulla victoriously marched into Rome, the Senate was once again dominated by the Optimates. This body now elected Sulla as dictator for an unspecified amount of time, tasking him with reorganizing Rome's governmental structure, settling the state, so to speak. Rome hadn't seen a dictator since the Second Punic War over a century before. Sulla ruled as a dictator for the next 3 years, using his omnipotent position to persecute and execute remaining populares and their followers. He did so by issuing the infamous Lex Cornelia. For the first time in Roman history, he published a list with the names of senators and military commanders who fought against him. Through this terror, he managed to purge his enemies, and much later Roman rulers would use similar tactics to get rid of opposition. He also increased the power and influence of the Senate, as opposed to the tribunus plebis, and made it more difficult for men of non-noble descent such as Gaius Marius to rise to the function of consul. He increased the number of standing jury courts, but removed the equal liberty principle, granting the senatorial class the position of jury. Decisions by the ordinary people's tribune had to be agreed to by the aristocratic Senate, while members of the tribune were excluded from any future positions within the Roman government. Ambitious men would now shy away from this body. He disconnected the position of consul from having supreme command over the military. From now on, consuls had to remain in Italy, while the provincial authorities received command over the military. He also ensured land was distributed to his veterans who had remained loyal through the past turbulent years. Visola and Pompeii received a considerable influx of settlers, becoming somewhat of Sullan colonies. And interestingly enough, Sulla voluntarily stepped down from his position as dictator in 79. He passed away 1 year later without any official function, but he didn't leave a stable Rome. Although his new constitution prevented aristocratic and ordinary men alike from assuming too much power, there was constant agitation against the Optimatus-dominated Senate, not to mention that this period saw piracy on the Mediterranean run wild. Another sign of just how unstable Rome was the Great Slave Revolt led by the Thracian slave Spartacus, which broke out just 6 years after Sulla's death. Eventually, this revolt was suppressed by Rome's richest man Crassus, with the help of the aforementioned general Pompeius. Both men assumed a position of influence in Roman politics and twisted the Senate's arms to elect both of them as consul in 70 BC. It marked the beginning of the direct downfall of the Roman Republic, although a case can be made for the downfall to be set in motion decades earlier already. Thank you very much for watching this video. If there's a topic or event you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also really like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you will already get access to the exclusive Patreon series. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.